ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to our Space Warfighting Studies Forum here at the Mitchell Institute. I'm Kevin Chilton, the Explorer Chair, and happy to host you today. And what a great program we have set up for you today, because we have three of the Space Force's Delta commanders joining us today. Col Miguel Cruz, who's the Delta 4 commander. Col Matthew Holston is the Delta 8 commander. And Col Robert A is the Space Launch Delta 30 commander. And I'm excited to have them on board because the stand-up of deltas, this is brand new. And there's a lot of confusion out there about what a Delta command is, what their responsibilities, how this fits into the broader Space Force organization. So these gentlemen are going to give us an opportunity to explore that a little bit today and really raise a level of understanding of their responsibilities and what their teams are doing in support of our national security space operations. So gentlemen, welcome. It's really great to have you here. And I thought, it's typical in this forum, we like to begin by giving our guests an opportunity to share a few of their thoughts, and then we'll fill in the dialogue discussions with some Q&A as we go through the session today. So Colonel Cruz, if you don't mind, I'd like to begin with you. If you give us a little thumbnail about your command at Delta 4.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you so much, sir, for the opportunity, General Chilton, and to you and to the Mitchell Institute for this opportunity. Can't think of a better way to spend that a Friday afternoon, especially joined by my good friends from a long time, Col Matt Holston and Rob Long. We've known each other for quite a while. So again, Miguel Cruz, go by Mac, commander of the Space Delta 4, the missile warning, missile tracking Delta. I think we have already pretty much talked a lot over the last year or two in terms of how space is important to our way of life, to our way of war, to pretty much everything that we do. So I'm not going to dive into that. I think this audience understands that very well. One key aspect, however, missile warning in my current capacity is what we consider one key aspect of how space is intrinsically connected to the defense of our nation, the defense of our allies, and the protection of our deployed troops around the world. And so that's where we fit the importance of not only space as in the civilian term, but also space in the military term, and how missile warning fits into that. Our job really is to provide strategic and theater missile warning and tracking. We do that for the United States. We do that for our international partners. We also do that in support of combatant commanders worldwide. And we can probably talk a little bit about the events a couple of years ago during the Al-Assad attack, where we had a very strong role in there. To do that, oh, by the way, we do that for three main purposes. The first one is always deterrence, right? Nobody really wants a conflict that extends into space. The other one is protection of human lives and property as well, to the utmost of our ability by virtue of the notifications that we provide and giving people enough time to essentially duck and cover, right? As was the case on the Al-Assad event. And then, of course, if deterrence fails, we also want to make sure that we are postured to enable a decisive response as part of a combined or joint force. So it's not only about ourselves, it's about how we do this in combination with our sister services as well as international partners. To do this, we utilize sensors in space, in the ground, and in the middle. So 3 space sensors in 3 orbital regimes. Combined are supported by 6 ground-based radars throughout the world, and then also supported by an array of comm relay sensors throughout the world to enable that communication and that data transfer to occur. Of course, that doesn't happen in isolation. We have great support from the intel community with specificity in space intelligence, as well as cyber intelligence. And then, as I just mentioned, a good support from the cyber defense team and cyber defense professionals to essentially form the shield to our sword, if you will, in our operations. So 10 direct report units, 5 direct support units on about 11 locations around the world. We are a total force. We have support from the National Guard as well as the Reserve, and we are also a combined operations. We have Canadians, we have Brits, we have Australians and New Zealanders in our operations as well. From my perspective, I would say missile warning, in conclusion, is a national security imperative. I don't think there is security without missile warning, it's particularly in space. And the way we see it is an essential element of deterrence for our nation and our allies, as well as an essential element to victory should we ever go to conflict in space. Thank you very much. I look forward to the questions.
Outstanding summary. Thank you so much. It's queued up a few questions I have in my mind for you. So we'll circle back to you here in a little bit. Colonel Long, we're going to move you up in the batting order here. I'm sure you're ready. See you in the on-deck circle. Thanks again for joining us today, and appreciate any thoughts you want to share with us at the top of the program here on your Delta, please.
Yeah, thanks, sir. Appreciate it, General Chilton, obviously for inviting us to speak today. And as Max said, it's good to see two old friends on this panel here. I will say, I'll add that, that's one of the great things about the Space Force. The thing is, we've got a lot of people that have known each other for a long time, and we're kind of, it helps when you're creating new organizations to have that connective tissue out there. And knowing you can phone a friend. But for me personally, yes, I'm out here at Space Launch Delta 30. It's a great time to be part of the launch business. We're definitely ramping up. I'll talk a little bit here first about what we do out at Space Launch Delta 30. And then I'll, like I said, as Max said, I'll kind of turn it back over. But we are one of two Space Launch Deltas. And you'll notice the name there is different, and I'll get to that in a little bit. And both of our missions are to provide spaceport and range services for DoD and industry. That's kind of fundamentally what we're about here out here at Vandenberg for SLD 30. We operate the Western Range and provide capabilities across the spectrum of national security, civil, various private industry, as well as things for missile testing, aircraft testing, ground and sea force exercises. Quite the gamut that includes customers like the NRO, National Reconnaissance Office, Air Force Global Strike Command, Missile Defense Agency, and I could continue to list those out. So it's a pretty diverse mission set out here in terms of customers anyway that we support. We're primarily here though. We exist to launch into polar orbits, and we can talk about that maybe a little detail later on based on our southern location here and being right next to the Pacific Ocean. That also helps us though on the Pacific being able to do long range test activities out, whether that's ICBM testing, ground-based interceptor testing. There's a host of other examples of that as well. But I like to always point out that our mission is to provide world-class range services, but we kind of view ourselves as a strategic platform, providing world-class installation support as well. So, we have 118,000 acres of land out here at Vandenberg, over 11,000 folks that are here on kind of an average daily basis. And it's with that kind of installation commander hat on that we provide support to all of our mission partners here. General Burt is here on the station with us as the Combined Force Space Component Command. Obviously, the CSPOC is here. We have the operational ground-based interceptors, the schoolhouses for both space and missile. We have a new Delta that just stood up that's on site now. We have other SPOC units, other mission partners. So it's a real, as I've said, it's a real dynamic and diverse mission set from the installation perspective. And it's really that last aspect, the installation support, that makes us a bit different as a space launch Delta than some of the other Deltas. What we did here when it was constructed, everyone realized that the launch mission is really hard to separate the infrastructure side to the actual range and launch operations, the services that we provide. And so in doing so, they decided to keep the space launch Deltas, both sides of the house. So what we would call the garrison function and the operational function stayed underneath the space launch Delta. And it's been really great. And we can talk about that a little bit later too. But I remind our team regularly, when we broke down these stovepipes and we eliminated a middle level of management at the group level, it really forced us to integrate across what we would call the installation support side and the operations side. So we're not just a renamed 30th Space Wing. When we eliminated those groups, it really focused us on, hey, I could have a CE individual that is doing ops, although they wouldn't necessarily traditionally call themselves operators. And it's an important point, I think, overall to make. So the other aspect I'll add is we are different from the standpoint of we fall now under Space Systems Command. And that adds another layer of newness, I'll call it, in terms of how we go about our daily business and under what's called the Assured Access to Space Enterprise. And I can talk a lot more about that later on as well, but just, it really has aligned the launch program office and the two launch operational ranges and spaceports under one entity. And that really provides us a nice synergy across those. So I'll stop there, sir, and happy to go into any level of detail that would be useful.
Thank you. And you brought up a great point here before we go to Colonel Holston, is you're in a different command in the Space Force. So Colonel Cruz, you're under the Space Operations Command, is that correct?
That is correct, yes, sir, out of the Three-Field Space Operations Command.
And your boss is out at Peterson Air Force Base.
Yes, he is, yes, sir, Lieutenant General White.
Very good. Okay. And then he works directly for General Raymond. So, just seeing how this chain of command flows. And then for you, Colonel Long, your boss is head of acquisition, right, for the Space Force?
Yes, sir. I mean, he's the as a Space Systems Command commander. So Lieutenant General Gutlein, Mike Gutlein is the commander of that. And yeah, he has been tasked with bringing together the space acquisition function that originally started kind of under the Space and Missile Systems Center and has now been elevated to the field command level.
Very good. And he hangs his hat just down the road in El Segundo, California, right?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Okay, good. That's just painting this picture for the broader audience of, who you report to and what's your responsibilities. This is great. And Colonel Holston, we'll see if we can pull you up next. I think you're also in the Space Operations Command chain of command. You're Delta 8. And if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about your responsibilities and what Delta 8 does.
Hey, General Chilton, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right, sounds great. I do appreciate the caveat that this is not going over satellite communications. So apologize for some of the technical difficulties there. Thank you, sir, as well as the Mitchell Institute for the opportunity to participate in the Spacepower Forum. I think it's an incredibly important discussion, especially as we're about 2 years old now as a Space Force and stand up at the Deltas. As you alluded to, I do fall under Space Operations Command and Space Delta 8. My direct boss is Lieutenant General Whiting, and then reporting from there to General Raymond. So very flat organizational structure. Truly an exciting and historic time for the Space Force and our mission Deltas. And I'll say, as this audience is aware, the mission Deltas were really purpose-built to generate, present, and sustain space combat power to protect and defend U.S. space operations and enabling our way of life and our way of war. Within Space Delta 8, we're focused on military satellite communications and navigation warfare. We have a 24/7, 365 warfighting mission to ensure U.S. space superiority. And specifically, Space Delta 8 is headquartered out at Schriever Space Force Base. We do have backup location at Vandenberg Space Force Base out there where Colonel Long is. We have about 550 active duty Guardians across the Delta that perform our warfighting mission. And we're comprised of 2 operational squadrons, the 2nd Space Operations Squadron and the 4th Space Operations Squadron. 2 SOPs really provides our precision navigation and timing through the GPS system. And it's not only to the joint warfighter, but also to the entire world. We provide that signal as we command and control 37 GPS satellites. It literally touches over 4 billion users every day. And it's important to emphasize that it's a critical capability for our nation as well. It touches every critical infrastructure, and we have a responsibility to ensure that we protect it, we defend it, and we have an assured signal through our navigation warfare. And I think we can speak to that a little bit later throughout the discussion. We also have the 4th Space Operations Squadron, and that's the Space Force's largest space operations squadron. It operates our wideband and our protected satellite constellations. We have 29 satellites that we command and control across 5 different weapon systems. And I'll say, honestly, it's hard to overstate just how impactful 4SOPS is to the United States government and the warfighter. 4SOPS truly links the force across air, land, sea, and space through satellite communications. We command and control the Defense Satellite Communication System, Wideband Global SATCOM, MILSTAR, Advanced EHF, as well as 2 hosted payloads, the Enhanced Polar System. And they connect our national decision makers and our warfighters anywhere on the globe at any time. Speaking to the strategic impact of the Delta, if you think about it, between GPS and MILSATCOM, every element of our national power, military, informational, diplomatic, and economic, is reliant upon the space-based capabilities and signals that 2 SOPs and 4 SOPs provides every single day. So that's an exciting responsibility that we have here. And then, sir, lastly, I'll say to the audience, while we currently command and control wideband and protected satellite communications, we're excited here in fiscal year 22, after we get through FY22 budget resolution, we are at the forefront of transferring Army and Navy SATCOM missions over to the United States Space Force and ultimately to Space Delta 8. And so underneath the MILSATCOM umbrella, we will integrate the MILSATCOM enterprise where Space Delta 8 We'll do command and control for our narrowband missions that are currently performed out at Point Mugu in California by the United States Navy. That mission and approximately 150 personnel will transfer over to Space Delta 8 after we get the budget resolved. And then the United States Army is currently doing wideband payload control as well as MIL-SATCOM global management and allocation out at Fort Carson and Peterson Space Force Base. So approximately 500 soldiers and civilians will transfer over to the United States Space Force, and that wideband payload control mission will come to the United States Space Force in Delta 8 here in the near future. So we're excited about that. We'll stand up 3 additional operational squadron equivalents. Will be the 10 SOPs will replace the NAVSOC, which is out at Point Mugu. We'll continue to keep personnel there and fly that constellation out of Point Mugu. 53 SOPs will stand up in place of the 53rd Signal Battalion, which is currently run by the United States Army. And then we'll stand up the SATCOM Directorate at Peterson Space Force Base, which will do the global SATCOM management. So an exciting mission and an incredible opportunity as a Space Force to integrate the SATCOM enterprise under one umbrella. And that'll happen sometime later this year. So I'll cut it off there. It's a pleasure to participate in this important forum. Looking forward to the future discussion, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Colonel Holston. I'm going to start with some questions for you, so you keep unmuted there, because I think it's significant what you just wrapped up with. You're a growing organization as you start to bring in some of these other constellations that were typically operated by the other services, or at least they participated in them. The UHF, so low band. You think voice when we say UHF mostly, and then SHF. For satellites, and then the EHF, which you've traditionally had in the past for sure. Probably a combination in the middle there. Do I have that about right?
Yes, sir, you do. So everything from UHF to EHF and everything in between will be managed and controlled by the United States Space Force and Space Delta 8 with respect to MIL-SATCOM. Certainly, there is a huge reliance and a dependency and coordination with the commercial sector as well, in particular for wideband communications, that we continue to partner with Space Systems Command for that. But as far as MIL-SATCOM operations, all of the satellite command and control will fall under the United States Space Force once we transfer those missions over.
That's great. A good unity of command move. I think that makes good sense for sure. And you mentioned the commercial side of this as well. My recollection is, back when I was on active duty, there was, some of our operations in the Middle East, we depended heavily on renting transponders from commercial SATCOM to support us in those operations for various parts of the operation. Do you envision that still being a critical element going forward in your command?
Absolutely. I think we're going to continue to rely on and increase the partnership that we have with our commercial SATCOM service providers. When you take a look at the amount of bandwidth, in particular in theaters in CENTCOM as well as INDOPACOM, and throughout the world, we're going to need to rely on our commercial providers. We have a commercial integration cell that is currently embedded with the Combined Space Operations Center out there at Vandenberg Space Force Base. We have a strong relationship with our commercial partners, and we are looking to increase that collaboration and partnership as we move forward.
Awesome. Thank you. Colonel Cruz, if I could switch to you next. I want to pull a thread on, you used a couple descriptors about the missile warning you provide. One you said was strategic and one theater. And how you parse those can be kind of interesting, but I would think when you say strategic, you're talking about to inform National Command Authority with regard to things like intercontinental ballistic missiles being launched, submarine launched, and the level of precision required for that versus the level of precision required for providing warning to a regional theater. I know you want to be precise in everything you do, but can you talk about maybe a little bit the difference that you think about when providing that type of missile warning and how you prioritize what's important in these areas?
Yes, sir. So thanks very much for that question. So yes, from a mission standpoint, we do make the differentiation very much like you just articulated. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, SLBMs, sea-launched ballistic missiles, form essentially the traditional strategic threat that we have been monitoring over the years ever since the Cold War, right? So that is a traditional threat, if you will, and we continue to do that. Operational and really functionally, we're using very much the same sensors. So at the operational level or at the tactical level in the unit, there really isn't very much differentiation. You pointed out, yes, theater missiles is more of a medium range, shorter range, Scots type of missiles, if you will, if you recall, Desert Storm, Desert Shield. And that is the differentiation. So the notification is a little bit different in terms of, as you pointed out, the strategic side goes into the National Command Authorities, the theater side goes into the Combatant Command notification system. And so that notification is a little bit different, but the way that the system performed is actually very, very similar to each other. And once those notifications ensue, or what that indication happens, the crews react immediately to those notifications, as it was in the case for in the Al-Assad attack. Of course, if there is a need to decide between strategic and theater, obviously, that depends on what type of missile, how it is characterized, how much time you have to react to it. Obviously, in the theater sense, there's a little bit less time to react. In the strategic sense, it's probably a little bit less, although there is not a lot in that sense. So you pointed out very well. But at the tactical level for the operator, the reaction time and the speed in which we perform the mission and how the sensors identify and locate and track those missiles is relatively similar.
Very good. Well, and you also talked about being able to attribute an attack, which is one of the key elements of deterrence. If someone can do something and not be attributed to it, they'll do it, or they're more likely to do it. But the fact that you know where these missiles come from, and so you can respond to either the theater commander or the National Command Authority at the source of the attack. And the fact that they know that you will know is a deterrent and important.
So of course, this is all underpinned by a lot of intelligence that comes pre, during, and after, right? So going to the attribution aspect of it, that is a big piece to that as well.
Well, and the Al-Assad attack, I think, is a great story to tell. And if you could tell it quickly in whatever manner, unclassified manner, of course, here on this forum, but you guys really made a difference, your team.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I believe it was 2009, and Bravo crew from the 2nd Space Warning Squadron was on watch that particular day. They received the indications of warning that there were missiles coming inbound to Al-Assad. They made the rapid notification via phone and then coordinated theater command authorities to move troops out of harm's way. As a result, there was 0 loss of life and minimum equipment damage.
That's fantastic. That's great work by your team. We know that I just wanted to make sure that story was told for our audience, to make sure they understood the critical role your team played in getting the heads up so people could take shelter and minimize casualties there. So thank you for that.
Yes, sir.
Colonel Long, if I could, I'd like to talk a little bit, give you an opportunity to explain the significance of your geographic location. And, I like to say, geography matters even in space. And it certainly does for Colonel Cruz, where he places his radars for early warning. But your unique location on a part of California that sticks out far enough you can shoot due south and not hit LA or San Diego is pretty special. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, sir, absolutely. Usually when I like to describe when we do it, we always have to kind of fundamentally come back to the main purpose that we exist. And obviously I mentioned earlier, range services and providing a range is part of it, but really we're here to make sure that we protect the public and we do things safely. And so in doing so, if you're going to try to launch in a polar orbit, which typically goes to the south from the launch site, you need to do that where it's not going to overfly population areas, it's not going to overfly other land, you don't want to overfly heavily traveled areas. That's kind of your key point, because you want to make sure you do it as safely as possible and you don't risk the public's safety. You can certainly reach other highly inclined or polar orbits from other launch sites. So you could go to Cape Canaveral, and some do at times, but you pay a performance penalty when you do that because you have to launch to the east and then turn south. And generally, I would say that every performance penalty is less payload to orbit. So companies will make an efficiency call on that when they do that. But ultimately, that's kind of why I always call Vandenberg the strategic platform, right? There's a few locations in the world that offer what we can provide here. Number one is location, but then just the infrastructure that's been built up over the decades and the range services. So, when we talk about that, our location is vitally important as a strategic asset, I would say, to the nation. And we're not going to be, I think, without business here in the future.
Well, and to that point, you see, typically we see because of the commercial aspect, because of the launches that go to geosynchronous, they're mostly coming out of, well, they're all coming out of, for the most part, out of Cape Canaveral, that area, and launching due east. And so the launch frequency out of Vandenberg Space Force Base in the past has not been as high. But do you see that stepping up a little bit going forward?
Yes, sir, absolutely. I mean, all forecasts are pointing to increased launch rates, both on the East Coast and the West Coast. As you mentioned, the degree might be slightly different, but United Launch Alliance and SpaceX aren't slowing down anytime in the future. We have numerous new customers and interest coming out here. Companies like Stratolaunch, Relativity, ABL. I could keep going. Astra is another one. They're all trying to figure out what the best way to leverage our location, our set of services for both space launch. And then I should also mention our test activities that come out here. So the ground-based strategic deterrent test program will eventually, as a development program, will come out here, and they're gonna keep us busy for the foreseeable future. We're not going to slow down, at least in the near term, on Minuteman testing. So for ICBM testing there, MDA will continue, and they've got their new program coming online, development program too. So we don't see any let up in the future in terms of business. And ultimately, that's why we really want to be just what we would call a range of choice, especially for polar orbits and test activities, right? Because as I mentioned, we do kind of provide a unique set of capabilities and a location, obviously, to create opportunity for our customers. And that's really what we want to do. We're trying to really transform ourselves into this national spaceport model. We're still working through what that model looks like and what it really is. Well, we're a customer service provider, and we want to provide a host of tailorable services that facilitate safe, flexible, repeatable, simultaneous operations so that we can really be the most efficient way as much as we can when we talk about our range operations.
But what do you need to grow at this? I mean, what you just detailed, between missile defense, the new ICBM coming on board, having to keep the other one still proven that it can work along the way, not only DoD polar orbit, but now civilian interest, commercial interest in it. It's quite a ramp up. What do you need to meet that? Are you well positioned right now to accommodate all this growth?
Obviously, the good thing about Vandenberg is we have plenty of land area. So that's one thing that we are not short of. But we continue to see, the demand signal, as you mentioned, be critical. So really, when we talk about it, we're really looking at what the range of the future looks like. And we actually, talk a lot about the range of the future. And it's really what core set of services allow users to either self-provision them, what they need to, or come to us and provide capabilities to meet unique demands. And I think that's the one thing that we're really working hard on right now is we know kind of some basics about what the range of the future looks like in terms of those core services. But we just had a discussion with industry last week trying to tease out, what is a value that the ranges can provide in terms of national spaceports so that we can provide our launch service providers and our nation as a kind of as a strategic service about, if we could provision, for example, networks or processing capabilities or storage, network storage, would that be of interest? And if that's of interest, is there a model by which we would either figure out there's some level of service or fee associated with that? So we're really starting to, I think, and that's one of the things with coming into Space Systems Command is allow us to focus on that together. But I would be remiss in highlighting that none of this really happens without the automated flight safety system. So AFSS, you may have heard that before. That's really the key piece in transforming what we do, because it decouples what used to be a large set of infrastructure for traditional flight safety. So you can think your command destruct. So if we have to an errant space launch vehicle or an errant missile, we'll have to destroy it if it's going towards populated areas. When you take that infrastructure and you shrink it down and put it on the rocket itself with the right software in place, you really can then decouple a lot of those and be much more efficient. So, and we proved it out here recently. There's a lot of potential here. We were able to actually launch between an MDA test 34 hours later, just over 34 hours and 25 minutes later, we were supporting a commercial Starlink SpaceX launch. And that doesn't happen if SpaceX isn't using AFSS, because the ability to turn the range at this point in time is still not there. We'll get there eventually. But so in terms of, we're really trying to figure out what that model looks like. We had some great feedback from industry, and we welcome more really as we go forward.
Great. So I imagine your vision is one day you could do missile defense test in the morning. About lunchtime, you could launch an ICBM, and before the sun goes down, pop off a DoD and a civilian rocket all in one day.
Right, and that's
the
exactly
kind of
the
capability you're talking about, I think. Huh?
Yes, sir. Yeah, we're talking, when we get to a service model, we just have to define what's our baseline level of services. And then maybe there's a customer that's going to willing to pay for more flexibility, for example, or they might want more robust something else. And so that's what we're really trying to work through. So we can be, we really drive to, we're looking at a bunch of, there's airport models out there, there's seaport models, there's transit authorities. So we're looking at across the entire spectrum of analogous systems and organizations that will help inform what makes the most sense, so that we're really that range of choice.
Terrific, thanks. Colonel Holston, if I could jump back to you now, there's, finally, over the last several years, it seems like finally for me because I'm so old, but we're able to actually talk about the space domain as we should and need to talk about it as actually a contested domain, a domain where we've seen people demonstrate that they're willing to conduct combat operations in that domain. And so we have to start treating it like air, land, and sea domains. And first deter conflict there. And if that fails, make sure we're in a position to dominate. You articulated well and our dependency on the GPS constellation for all elements of warfighting in all domains. You talk a little bit about what we hear referred to as nav war, and how your team is preparing for eventualities in the space domain with regard to that mission set with GPS.
No, absolutely. I think, as we take a look at the space domain and the fact that it truly is a contested domain, and the GPS signal, the reliance that we have on it as a nation for our critical infrastructure, as well as warfighting across all of our domains, we have to think differently as we go forward about protecting that signal. So when you think about the GPS signal, I think sometimes the fact that it is so ubiquitous and that everybody uses this on a daily basis, they take it for granted and assume that GPS signal is going to be there, that it's going to be accurate, it can be trusted, and that it's going to be precise. But what we realized from the first Gulf War, and only increasingly since then, is our adversaries are watching, and they recognize that our PNT signal is a game changer for warfighting operations, as well as enabling all of the combat operations through all phases and mission support activity. And so we recognize that our adversaries see this as a strategic and competitive advantage for the United States and our warfighting capability. And so we have to be deliberate about taking actions offensively and defensively to make sure that we have a trusted PNT signal. Navigation warfare, really from a definition standpoint, are deliberate offensive and defensive actions that we take to assure that we can deliver that trusted PNT signal. And it's going to reach our allies, our coalition partners, and our U.S. and joint warfighters. And on the other side of that coin, that we deny that capability to our adversaries. And that's really what navigation warfare is all about. It's taking that PNT signal and making sure that it's trusted and assured. And we work in concert with the Joint Navigation Warfare Center that's down at Kirtland and the team there to make sure that we are looking offensively and defensively on how we protect and deliver that signal to our warfighters. Just some examples of the things that we're doing just within the scope of the 2nd Space Operations Squadron. To get after nav war actions, we have the ability to strengthen the GPS signal over theaters of interest and where we have warfighters that are conducting current operations. And so we have the ability to flex the power there and to provide a higher signal strength from an offensive standpoint. We have the ability to help mitigate adversarial jamming. We provide thousands of products. We're in discussions and conversations with each of the combatant commands every single day, talking about what operations are they conducting. We provide dilution and precision charts that basically tell you throughout the next 24 hours, what are you expecting as far as precision of that GPS signal based on the geometry of the satellites that are going overhead and the strength of the signal, and when is the best time to strike where we're going to be able to maximize efficiency and lethality. So we provide thousands of products to the warfighters and to the combatant commands. And then we are also in concert with our civilian users. We recognize that the PNT signal is an enabler for our critical infrastructure, whether we're talking transportation, aviation, space-based capabilities, finance, banking, telecommunications, oil and gas. All of those things enable our ability to project combat power. And so we work with the FAA and DOT the Navigation Center of Excellence on a daily basis to say, how are we protecting this signal to assure that it is precise and that it's trusted for our users? And then how do we deny that to the adversary? Not as much in the scope of the 2nd Space Operations Squadron, but as we look at this holistically as a whole of government, we have to deny PNT services to the adversary when we talk about the contested domain. So in concert with cyber, the electromagnetic spectrum, as well as jamming capabilities and alternate PNT means, what are ways that we can deny the adversary the same capability that we use for advantage in combat? And so those are some of the things that we're doing from a Delta 8 perspective, from a navigation warfare perspective. And I think the bottom line is, trusted and assured PNT, it provides a significant competitive advantage for the United States and our ally and coalition partners. And it's an indispensable part of our critical infrastructure, and we have to work jointly on a daily basis through navigation warfare to make sure that we maintain PNT superiority.
Great, thank you for that, because we are so dependent on that capability, aren't we?
Yes, sir.
Colonel Cruz, can I shift back to you? I want to pull a thread on some of these new threats we're seeing emanate from both China and Russia. Boost glide vehicles, long-range, high-speed cruise missiles, fractional orbital bombardment systems, which the Chinese recently demonstrated a capability, or I should say tested that capability, which, by the way, personally, I think is in violation of the Space Treaty, and we ought to remind them of that. But most of our Cold War, or most of our assets that we have for providing strategic warning to the homeland, not so much talking about theater warning now, we're oriented toward the north because the threat was from the former Soviet Union, remains so today from Russia. Ballistic missile threats that would come over the pole, the North Pole, not the South Pole. And our systems, SBIRS satellites, DSP satellites, could provide the early warning of those launches. And then those radars that you mentioned, that are 6 ground-based radars, could eventually pick them up and track them. But perhaps that infrastructure is not adequate for the threats that we see being developed now. So I wonder if you could comment on that, and maybe through the lens of what you think as we go to the future here, as we look at your mission set, what do we need to provide that same type of early warning that you do so well today for National Command Authority?
Yes, sir. Well, thank you very much. So you're absolutely correct. A lot of the weapon systems and the sensors that we have under our purview right now were developed from a different era. From an era when we didn't have space as a warfighting domain. It wasn't as contested and certainly wasn't as aggressive as we have seen it. I will point out, however, that the traditional threat is not going anywhere. In fact, I was just reading yesterday, there was a quote from a Russian Strategic Forces commander who was articulating how Russia is intending to conduct at least 10 ICBM or intercontinental ballistic missile tests in year 2022. So that threat continues, and our sensors continue to be just as liable and just as good to be able to pursue that. We have done the job so well on our sensors, however, that we have been able to use them and far outlast their design life. And so that is a good thing for us. Just kind of talks to the technical expertise of our folks. But you are absolutely right. There's newer capabilities out there, just like the ones that you mentioned. And I think us as an enterprise lawyer, we're approaching that with a three-pronged approach, if you will. The first one, I think, is the technological capability development of sorts. So right now we have the entire acquisitions apparatus in the United States, from Space Development Agency to the Missile Defense Agency, the United States Space Force, the Air Force as well, all getting us a network sensor of capabilities that will be able to track those threats that you mentioned for the entirety of the flight. So we're already pushing in that direction. What we have right now works, but I think it's necessary that we move beyond what we have right now, if for no other reason that at some point the sensors are going to, there are Cold War era sensors, so we need to move to that. I think in the future the orbital regime will become, of course, more prevalent, because it's a much easier picture from space to ground to be able to detect and track those missiles from the beginning to the end. But the ground-based radars will continue to fulfill a very important mission. And oh, by the way, missile warning being their primary mission, but they also have a substantial impact in the space domain awareness mission as well. There's a lot of satellite tracking and object tracking that ensues and happens at the ground-based radars, not necessarily associated with missile warning. So they are going to continue to be workhorses, if you will, for us. So technological and capability development being one of them. The second one, I think, is organizational approach. The entire reason why we created the United States Space Command, United States Space Force, and how we organize as deltas was predicated on the fact that we were operating in a warfighting domain. That's why the deltas were created. And that's why the structure of the deltas was so much flatter so that we can move faster, more agile, quicker. And I think you mentioned at the beginning, sir, we're still getting a lot of questions from folks of what a delta really is. And the way that I like to explain it is this. Think about an Air Force wing. Think about an Army brigade. Think about a Marine regiment. Is the ability to put the entire concentrated mission area enterprise under the purview of a single commander, therefore giving you unity of command and unity of effort. And so that's really what the intent behind that was. So organizational approach. And the third one in my mind is also talent management and development. As you very well know, for the longest time, space operators have been seen or considered themselves more of a supporting role to a fight. And General Dickinson has said this many a times. He's not only a supporting commander, he's also a supported commander. And so to grow that warrior ethos, that warrior mentality, that war fighting spirit, if you will, in our operators is going to be very, very important. That kind of approach to planning and thinking and debriefing and speaking that was somewhat reserved to, say, weapons school graduates is now supposed to permeate throughout the entire force so that every operator is a warfighter. And so that's what I was saying is our approach, the enterprise approach to this, technological capability development, organizational approach, as well as talent management and development.
Terrific, great. Thanks for giving us that analogy with the brigade, regiment, wing. I think that'll help our listeners see where you guys and your commands fit into the broader structure here in your mission sets. And also for bringing up the fact that your radars not only provide missile warning, but they're critical to space domain awareness, which is something that U.S. Space Command needs more and more of. And so that they're a backbone there for sure. I'm sure there's other technologies we need to support that and field as well, but that dual use function is really important.
Hey, quite frankly, sir, we always talk about missile warning, but in reality, it's missile warning and tracking. So it's not only about the detection of the boost phase or the initial notification, it's also the mid-course intercept data that is transferred to the Army batteries that will respond and take those missiles out. And so it's more than just ringing the bell. It's right. Actually, I like to tell the story to my folks. We are very much the spotter to the sniper. And the spotter is very much a warfighter, just like the sniper is. Just because he or she doesn't pull the trigger doesn't mean he's not a warfighter. So that's the kind of attitude and impetus that we're trying to instill in our operators.
Terrific. Thank you for that. Well, I think we've reached the point where our audience, and by the way, we have over 120 participants today. So your words are getting out and helping to lift up the understanding of your mission sets around the country here. We'll switch to Q&A from the audience. And Lucas is going to help us out here by acting as a filter for the questions that come in, not to filter any tough ones out, but just to make sure he's trying to get the ones that spread across the three deltas here. So Lucas, over to you.
Thank you, sir. I think we'll go first to Sandra Irwin.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking my question. This is a question for any of the colonels that would like to comment on this, but I'm curious if you can reflect on what has changed in your work since you've been in the Space Force. I mean, you were doing launch, you were doing PNT, you were doing missile warning when you were in the Air Force, and you all grew up in the Air Force. So how would you describe what's changed and maybe some of the cultural issues that you've encountered since you transitioned to the Space Force? Thank you.
Well, Ms. Irwin, how are you? Colonel Cruz here. I'll offer two things. The first one, I think the organizational change by virtue of being a little bit flatter, I think there's a much faster way to get to decision making. And we experience this a lot when we're trying to build the Delta and grow the Delta from its inception. The decision to organize and how we were going to organize the type of units that we were going to need within the Delta, that decision was much faster. We had to go through several echelons of decision making. The second one that I would point out is probably cultural, more of an identity thing. I think, and it goes back to what I was talking about a little bit earlier, the fact that a space operator now sees himself and herself not only as having his or her own service, but the fact that they are now called upon to be warfighters, not merely space operators providing a service, but actually warfighters. They are put together to defend the nation against strategic attack or theater missile attack, as is in my case. So the cultural aspect and the organizational aspect and the decision-making aspect of that, to me, are the ones that come to mind most readily.
Thank you very
Hey,
much.
Hey, Sandra, this is Colonel Holston with Delta 8. I'd like to piggyback on that a little bit as well. You know, kind of from my perspective, certainly organizational change, but I'll tell you, you know, I wore the Air Force name tape for 20 years and transferred over to the Space Force. The biggest shift that I have seen is a focus on the threat. I can tell you we have made deliberate decisions to change our operation support squadrons to combat training squadrons and focus not just on what we do on a day-to-day basis from a satellite command and control and allocation of signal, but focus on what does it truly mean to do navigation warfare, to protect and defend that PNT signal, to assure we've got a trusted PNT signal. And so we have beefed up our advanced training. We are intelligence-led cyber secure, and you'll hear that from Space Operations Command, from every commander at all echelons of command. We start off, what is the threat that we're facing today, and what is the threat that's going to be emerging in this contested environment, and getting that warfighting ethos that Max talked about to every single Guardian that is on our floor, recognizing that space combat power is a critical enabler for our nation, and our adversaries are trying to take that away. And so the integration between our intel professionals, our cyber professionals, our space operators, our acquirers and engineers has really grown and increased the collaboration and integration that we have. But we are clear-eyed on the threat that we're faced with in the space domain and focusing all of our training and our repetition to get after that high-end fight. And I think you also see that on the resourcing side as we take a look at what weapon systems are we going to be going after, the upgrades that we have to do to make sure that we as a service are going to be able to present the capabilities to fight in that contested domain.
Thank you so much. Colonel Long?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. And I think I can't, I'm not going to ignore what Mac and Matt said, because it's exactly the truth. But I'll add a different flavor coming from a different field command now. Obviously, we transitioned over, and the threat's the most important thing. And I would say we're all mission focused. How that manifests itself kind of on our Space Systems Command is a bit, I'll say, different given the acquisitions nature of that. But what we've seen is when we created the Assured Access to Space Enterprise, or the organization, by combining the launch program office and the two ranges under one a single general officer, that forced us to really codify things that we had been working on for many years. And we had been building these partnerships, but driving that into one organization, and we're already seeing benefits in a mission-focused way, so that we were providing the entire spectrum of services from launch procurement all the way through on into orbit. And in doing so that's kind of at the fundamental strategic level when we talk about the field command change. But then that trickles down, and I want to make sure I'd add one other thing that's somewhat unique to us, is we can't do our job without the Air Force and the airmen that are sitting here at Vandenberg and elsewhere across Space Force bases. It's probably a bit more personal to me, just because I'll have people, Air Force airmen, sitting ready to launch something or in support of launching, and they are absolutely critical. I mentioned our quick turnaround recently, and sometimes one of the limit facts is, for example, fire support. Right, we're a high fire season at the time. And we don't want to take too much risk, and potentially when you have a big rocket taking off and a lot of flames around a really dry area, But our wildland fire crews and our fire department is absolutely critical to making sure we're successful in our mission. And so, you know, all of those layers that we are starting to pull back and remove from our organizations are allowing us to really drill down quickly and get into that lean and agile posture that allows us to do things like launching within 34 hours. Over.
Thank you.
Okay, our next question is for Colonel Cruz. Can you discuss how you exercise to ensure your team is always ready for the real event? Is there a need for more or better training capabilities?
Yeah, there can never be too little training or too little training. We train every day. In fact, every time an operator is already certified, there is a process for recurring training on a monthly basis. So that is happening. Every time we see indications of adversary, different ways of doing business, when Russia launched the ASAT, when China has launched the hypersonic, we always take those opportunities as advanced training to inculcate that into our crews. We also do a lot of theater level exercise integration, not only the training for ourselves, but also how we can bring space capabilities in support of combatant commanders worldwide. And then we'll do more space specific training, for example, space flag, that allows us to understand how we integrate together within the deltas. There is a symbiosis, if you will. There's an intricate relationship between what we do in missile warning and say Delta 2 for space domain awareness, or Delta 3 for electronic warfare, or Delta 9 for orbital warfare. And so all those relationships are built through training, exercise, continuous knowledge, and education.
Great. The next question is for Colonel Long. Do you see the commercial model financing the infrastructure for DoD launches?
I think that's exactly the question we're struggling with right now. And what we've really been working with industry on is getting back to fundamentally, what is the core set of services that we need to provide as a range and as a spaceport, so that we can be postured most effectively, almost to service a wide range of customers, because every customer is going to be a bit different. Our test community is going to be a bit different than our commercial space launches. And we're just really trying right now, especially when we talk range of the future, trying to dial in what are those core set of services that we want to provide that are part of a DoD infrastructure here at each launch base. And then from there, trying to understand what else on that menu of services do you need, and how would we come up with the either the service or fee-based approach, or is there something else that we can do in kind? So we're just now tackling that, and honestly, we welcome any thoughts on that from industry, from all the smart people out there. So we're really, it's an exciting time to be kind of tackling, how do we transform our model into a national spaceport that's effective for all customers.
Colonel Holston, you mentioned owning all signals in UHF. Does that mean that the Space Force will be taking over AFRC and SARSAT ELT monitoring?
This is Colonel Holston. Great question. No, we will not be taking over, or when you say the RSSCs and Army Strat, was that the question?
Specifically, AFRC and SARSAT ELT monitoring.
Okay. Hey, maybe I'll address it a different way as we talk UHF. We will be picking up command and control as well as payload allocation for the ultra high frequency follow-on system, or UFO, FleetSat, the mobile user objective system, or MUOS, as well as the interim polar system. So those are the current narrowband systems that the NAVSOC currently flies and operates out of Point Mugu, and those are the specific systems. There's 11 operational satellites across UFO, FleetSat, and MUOS, and then 2 hosted payloads, the interim polar system, that we will be taking over from the Navy. And that's pretty much the scope of what we'll be transferring to the Space Force from a narrowband position.
Great. And then just a question for anyone who wants to take it up. What do you see as the biggest challenge with integration of coalition partners within Space Force?
I think one of the things, this is Colonel Cruz, one of the things that I will offer that we'll always work towards is the interoperability of systems. The other one will be just how well we can integrate and plan and execute together. The United States doesn't go to conflict by itself. It always does it as part of the joint force. It always does it as part of a coalition. And so that is an enduring theme that we have noticed over the years. And the same thing will happen in space. We are very fortunate, however, that the preponderance of our operations in space have benefited from our international partners, from the command and control piece to the execution and assessment, from the intelligence piece and so on. And so as long as we remain doing that, and as long as we continue to plan, train, execute, exercise together, we just get better at it. Now I say that also realizing that we are very good at what we do, and our partners that do this with us day in and day out are very good at it as well. So there's always room for improvement, but we're already the best in the world.
Yeah, great comments there from Matt, Colonel Holston from Delta 8, and continuing to drive interoperability and integration with our partners is absolutely what we're trying to do. Certainly one of the obstacles to that, to the heart of the question, is certainly classification levels. So anything that we can do to continue to be able to share information so that we can get the reps in with our international partners, be able to share that information and actually exercise together. Security classifications are one of the things that we continue to work on, and we recognize are one of the obstacles to that. But to Mac's point, our international partners are absolutely critical to our success, and we're doing everything that we can to increase integration going forward.
Terrific. Well, I think we're just about out of time here, Lucas, on the Q&A. I'm going to reserve the host's right to make a few final comments here. I love what I'm hearing from all three of you gentlemen about this warfighting ethos that, you know, we really were just allowed to start talking about a few years ago, and how you're focused on that and developing it. Colonel Cruz, I think you've articulated it well, and Colonel Holston both, you know, whether it's nav war or the importance of what missile warning does to, as you say, the sniper, he can't do his job without you. The handoffs to missile defense, whether they be theater or strategic, are really important. And Colonel Long, but I'm gonna throw one at you, maybe a curveball, but it's certainly, you know, and it's not fair to have an answer. I don't expect an answer, but do you anticipate this? Because, you know, we always look at the homeland as being just this safe, secure area, you know, protected by two great oceans. We only have two major launch sites, and they're fixed and they're on the coast, you know, in Florida, and your operation there at Vandenberg Space Force Base. And one might anticipate in a conflict with another major power that in a space fight in particular, we're looking to reconstitute or bolster our capability, that those installations could actually come under threat of attack. And so are we beginning to think about how we would sustain our assured access to space in time of conflict?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say two things. First of all, the threat has not been lost on us, in the launch business any more so than anywhere else in the Space Force. And we recognize that, especially, you know, our geography is a double-edged sword, right? We need to be on the coast, and then obviously opens us up to some pretty easy access from the sea anyway. So we recognize that, and we've taken some steps to make sure that we're secure on a couple different fronts. And I'd add on to that, you know, we've started the discussion about what's the national strategic infrastructure when we talk about spaceports. So you have two spaceports, or DoD spaceports, effectively on the East Coast and the West Coast, but there are other launch ranges that we could launch from. So we could go to, there's Virginia, there's Alaska, there's a host of others that are continuing to grow and develop. So we have to take a holistic approach to understand what makes the most sense. You know, you're going to have some core capabilities probably at East and West Coast at the two Space Force bases, but ultimately we definitely have to, you know, if you're talking resiliency, you want to have a bunch of different options that you could potentially go to include, you know, an airborne option, or there's companies like ABL and some of these that are looking for some roll on, roll off that can do it on a pretty minimal infrastructure site. So yeah, there's a lot of effort, I would say, getting just after that point, and I'm looking forward to see where that grows in the coming years.
Terrific. Well, I think we've run out of time, gentlemen. I want to thank you for your service to our country. Please, we salute your commands and thank you for taking time out today to help and maybe enlighten folks who are trying to learn and understand better what your missions are and how Space Force is structured through the Delta organization construct. I also want to thank our audience. I mean, if we didn't have over 120 people joining us today dialing in, what's the point of doing it? And so we've got a great audience here, and really appreciate your participation, your interest, and your questions. This will be our last forum for 2021, and I assure you we've got some good forums. We're teeing up for 2022. It's going to be an exciting year, just as it's an exciting time period in our nation's space business, and are taking on of these new mission sets in the Space Force of treating the space domain just like every other domain as a potential warfighting domain, and posturing ourselves in such a way that we don't ever have to fight there, because no one wants to take us on, because they see what we can and will do in that domain. So on behalf of the Mitchell Institute for Space Power Advantage Research Center, the men and women that work here at the Mitchell Institute, we want to wish everybody happy holidays and look forward to seeing you in 2022. Thank you.